try to do a quick, probably not quick,
definitely
but,
not quick,
video going over just a little bit more context of putting all this stuff together, because it's one thing to have a technique or two, but if you're unable to kind of work these techniques well together, then you're going to have a lot of holes that are going to be exposed by competent grapplers. And the reason why we picked these movements together is because they can work really well in different layers that tie in together rather than just like disconnected techniques.
Yeah, and as I mentioned kind of towards the end of the frame and hip escape video, depending on the context, the priority list for these movements and the availability will change. So we're going to try to give you a few different looks as far as how you might apply this.
So far we've been working from supine guard, we're on our back and we're doing guard retention movements from there when we were performing the high leg, then we were falling back to the half Granby, and then also looking at the frame and hip escape. So we'll look at it from there.
Yeah.
Rob's got his hips facing me, he's got all his tools here. Optimal time, like he's going to be just using his legs as much as he can here to be able to high pummel the legs, are the strongest part of the human body. So for Rob to be able to use his legs here and play is fantastic. It wouldn't make sense for Rob to put his feet down on the ground and look to try and do a frame and hip escape here, because it's going to create risk and there aren't going to be these powerful legs in play. So,
and there's no reason for me to do it at this distance.
No reason. Yeah. So here we're always looking at high legging. If the person is still here in front, Rob is looking to keep himself in good positioning. He's looking to keep his hips facing. He's going to be egg beatering. He's going to be performing bigger high leg motions all the time. If I start to redirect the legs to a point, Rob can still perform high legs here if he has the flexibility to do so, but he also has the ability to create some space and to mobilize his hips. Because if Rob's here and I've turned him slightly, he can still bridge off of me to lift those hips, and he can still create a nice strong arcing direction with that motion and get a nice strong leg press alignment here. Or like Rob had said, if he has supplementary frames here, he's comfortable having his foot coming in and a little bit more external rotation of the hip, because most of my weight is being held by his left side of his body here, and so he's going to be able to perform and get him back here. So that's going to be one of the trickiest things when you're first learning, is how far can you actually go and still be able to recover effectively and safely with a high leg, because you can be surprised at how far you can actually be.
And the answer to how far is basically going to be how good are your supplementary frames, so your arm frames. And to that extent, if I'm on Rory's biceps here, this is almost like a cheater frame where like he can't really affect much, right? If he goes into a standing position and tries to get around me, I can still I can be at a very extreme angle. Like my hips are like my knee is touching the ground. My hips are away from him. As long as I don't, and this is important, as long as I'm on the biceps and not on the shoulder, because if I were here, oh crap, yeah. So because I can keep his biceps relatively close to his hip, and his hip is what is going to threaten me as far as like the arm bar or anything like that. So he can have his hand here, and I can still high leg. That's how important the redundancy of your supplementary frames and the strength of your supplementary frames is.
Yeah. So now I've redirected his legs so far across that maybe Rob does not feel like he's going to be able to actually perform this. Maybe he's even in a situation where he's got that bicep frame here, and as he's trying to perform that high leg, he's like, it's not here. Rob has the ability to now perform that half Granby. You can see how, even though the half Granby is plan B, once we get to that certain situation at that range, I mean, it's the right tool for the job, so it becomes actually more efficient for us to use the half Granby at that place rather than trying to force the high leg.
Exactly. And then if my half Granby fails at that point, then the frame, the hip, or not, I should say fails, because if Rory's turning my legs away and I just go to half Granby, it truly fails. Then it's too late.
Yes.
But if we get to a position where Rory's getting to my hips, and I'm like, man, I'm not going to be able to lift my hips enough. Now I can extend, get my elbow out, frame him, and start the hip escape.
There's going to be a kind of a play within the guard passing. Unless I can get to a certain guard passing range and really control the upper body where you're fucked, and I can control lower and upper body at the same time, then I mean, you got a lot less options. But typically when I'm first trying to get these movements going, I can either put a majority of my pressure on your lower body or on your upper body. And so depending on where I am, once I've moved around and say Rob is framing me here, I have my weight transferring through this frame into his upper body. If Rob tried to sit up right now, it's not going to happen. If he tried to frame and hip escape from here, it's not going to happen. But his lower body is light, so he's able to high leg, he's able to half Granby. However, once I start pinning more, say, the legs like this, if Rob tried to lift his legs and perform any of those motions, you'd be like, no, that looks stupid, obviously, guys. But now Rob's upper body's light. He's able to build up frame in a different way and be able to get away from those movements. So when we're working on these different guard retention movements at different times, you're going to be paying attention to where a lot of your weight, where your opponent's weight, your training partner's weight is being placed on you, what frames you are using. Is your lower body going to be more mobile and able to get re-engaged into the fight, or is more weight leaning into the legs, and then your upper body is going to have to become more mobile? And then obviously, yeah, if I'm in half guard and I've managed to control the inside space with a cross face and an underhook and stuff like that, like this, we can see Rob isn't going to be able to move his lower body or his upper body. And while we're still looking at guard retention within like the realm of half guard there, the battle is much harder. You're in a higher state of crisis where you're like, man, I am about to get passed and probably submitted because I am so broken in my alignment. The battle becomes a lot more difficult.
Yeah, it's certainly beyond the purview of an introduction to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to try to address a problem that big where you've made so many mistakes in a row.
Yeah. So Rob, you have an interesting way that you've also been teaching this. You've been teaching a lot more than I have recently, and you've been looking at a way of creating the angle, because something that we'll see from a lot of higher level guys is that they don't usually just keep their hips square. Yeah. They actually will turn themselves to create a side to force their opponent into limited options.
Yeah, so because it can still be like, even though we've given you a, if A then B, if B then C kind of scenario, people still struggle with the idea of when do I high leg and when do I Granby depending on the angle. So for our beginners, what we've tried to do is create a just like a gambit that we can use. So I'll be on my back to force my opponent, or at least to give my opponent an option that allows my decision-making process to be a little bit easier. If I start just on my back here with my ankles like this, Rory can grab both my ankles, and now basically every passing threat, every direction is available. He can redirect, or if my response to that is to open my legs up, now he can start moving through the middle and knee cutting or knee overpassing, all that kind of stuff. So what I'm going to do is offer him one side. I'll turn to my right hip and have my right knee low and my right ankle very low. And then I'll raise my left leg slightly. The idea of having, not having your legs or your ankles in the same position, having alternating planes is one that Lachlan Giles popularized. This is a really good thing. If you are very flexible, this is a good thing. If you're not very flexible, just be careful with it because it may lead to a little bit of pressure on your hamstring that you don't want. But to even mitigate that, I'm not going to raise my leg overly. I'm just going to give him this so that what Rory can't, so what he can't do is immediately create frames on both of my ankles. So I give him a side, I give him one leg high and one leg low, so that when he grabs this leg, I can very easily put my high leg into play. And just by keeping my knee at my chest and my leg fairly high, even if I don't choose to put my high leg into play, which
I'm going to feed you a high leg if I try to do anything past.
Exactly. So if Rory's going that way, I can fairly easily high leg. He's going to be grabbing this ankle, which is fine. It's not a problem because for him to redirect this leg, if it was at this angle, he could redirect it very easily. But at this angle, there's
have to try and create force.
Yeah, and then I should be able to pummel out of that. So I'm making it so that it's very obvious to me which leg will be redirected and which leg will potentially be pinned. So as he takes this grip, if he goes this way, I can immediately check his biceps. So my supplementary frame is now available. My triceps is over top of my knee. And there's no way for him to pass to this side. If he were to continue to move in this direction, I could fairly easily just put this high leg into place. And now I've got my guard set up. I can, in the gi, I can make my grips. I can make pant, collar, sleeve grips. In no gi, I can grab the back of the head. I can grab the triceps. I can pull him into a guard of my choosing. And now I'm no longer in the retention phase. I'm in the maintenance phase. I can become instantly offensive. So I don't have to worry about an instant pass to this side. If Rory takes a step to this side and recognizes that he'll still be controlling my ankles, because if you weren't, let's go back for a second. If Rory didn't control my ankles and just stepped, I could just immediately tie him up into a guard. So he's going to want to avoid that. He'll be controlling my ankles. So as he does this and he recognizes, well, there's no real play to this side, he may choose to redirect my legs to the other side, which allows me to very easily high leg because the range is so far. If Rory were a little bit closer, that high leg, I might have to decide, do I high leg or do I Granby? And that's where people were having a little bit of difficulty. So this creates my instant, I'm at a good range here. I can either high leg or I can low leg and I can reset myself into that guard by choosing.
One more on this angle. When I'm here, I start to redirect. This momentum I generate off of his hips is also going to help him swing his hips around and perform this motion. As I go here to leg drag, I just give him the energy to be able to do this efficiently.
Exactly. So that solves the initial problem, which is, do I high leg? Yes. If Rory goes to my right, if I offered him my right hip, then I can immediately high leg. If he redirects me, I can immediately high leg. It doesn't create any problems as far as being forced to Granby. But if off of the initial grip, Rory just throws my leg to that side, then I have Granby, all right, inverted. So we're trying to funnel our opponent into a decision that seems like it's several options, but really every decision that they made was kind of what I wanted.
Yeah, you limited the variables, so we're able to look at it as 3 options there, where I either initially go to my left, which is the side you're facing, highlight is really easy, or I go left and then initially chain to the right, which is going to be one of the more advanced ways of doing it, because somebody is now chaining multiple directions of passing. But that was still something that you're looking for, because you know I can still perform that highlight. So we have a highlight for 2 of the options. Then you have, if I go immediately to the biggest door, the biggest opening, and I'm like, okay, I want to go that way.
Yeah.
But Rob has given me like that kind of angle as like, not that it's necessarily like bait, but it's just like it's a controlled door where it's like Rob knows that it's like, well, if I let Rory get too far that way, then I'm going to be able to force my game plan. I'm going to be able to get that dominant angle. You're going to risk back takes and stuff, but you're so ready for it that I never actually get that advantage on you.
Yeah, and again, all this is possible because of my understanding of those supplementary frames, and those frames will be at the biceps. So in this case, if Rory doesn't want to allow me to touch his biceps, he's just got to keep the distance. And if he does, then I can just egg beater and I can get back to some kind of guard. But if he wants to pressure into me at any point, I should be able to get onto his biceps. And the biceps here are just a proxy for the shoulder. It allows me to control, like, Rory's torso is a box. I want the top corner and on the left and the top corner on the right, or my right and his left. But if I were to reach for that at this distance, so if you back out for a second, you're controlling my ankles. If I reach for his shoulders now, I'm not able to get there. But as I bring my knees and I bring this, now he starts to pressure in, there we go. As soon as he starts to pressure in, I've got this distance controlled. I can immediately high leg. The block of my high leg would only work well if I weren't pushing on his biceps. But because I've got his biceps, I can frame them out, and I can like my high leg is basically like, there's almost no movement required. So the idea behind this is I've controlled his options so much because he wants to control my ankles. As soon as he controls my ankles, because I've brought them to where they need to be, I'm immediately able to get my supplementary frames, and I don't have to choose. I don't have to wonder, is it the shin, is it the shoulder, is it the knee? It's pretty much always going to be the biceps in this situation. And now, if he, like in this case, Rory started to pin my bottom knee. If you wanted to complete the pass now, how would you do it? I can just easily, like a high leg doesn't have to be my foot. In this case, the high leg is my shin. All right, so Rory started to move in. He got this, that's okay. Because I controlled the biceps, I prevented him from getting in front of my thigh, which would have made this a problem. So this supplementary frame here allows me to put my shin in. If I'm flexible enough, I can certainly use my foot to do this, but there's no real need. I can just push him away, take a little bit of that weight off, and I've got my guard back.
That's going to be the other really important thing that's just going to take an understanding and time in to really get used to it, is figuring out when the shorter frames need to come into play. So in that circumstance, I got close enough that Rob wasn't able to bring his foot in. And so at that point, if he keeps trying to use the foot, it's going to be the wrong attack here. He goes to a shorter range frame that needs less space, and so by using his knee, he's able to just put his femur in play. And while I'm going to have more options in the sense of how to counter it because I'm already that much closer, that's going to be the risk of using shorter range frames, it's the best choice that you have at that point, and you have a lot of options to be able to still powerfully keep me at distance.
Yeah, exactly. And now if we were to go to the seated guard, the high leg stops being an option. The way that I would play the hip escape and the Granby as my A-B options would be if Rory were standing, and as we discussed, if Rory's just circling to one side, I can just check him, I can just frame and circle around. If he steps in, I can scoot back or scoot to an angle. But if Rory were to quickly step to this side, and I wasn't able to get to a point where I can reliably, like I didn't frame him out early enough, and like so, advance the pressure a little bit. This sort of thing we're having. If I'm trying to hip escape, but that only creates more space for Rory to occupy. So in a scenario like that, because I recognize that the hip escape will actually compromise my knee-elbow connection and give him space to occupy, if Rory starts to crowd into me, now I'll Granby, and I'll have to play a recumbent guard briefly until I can get myself back up to a seated guard.
Yeah, that's an important thing to notice, that supine guard is a further range guard than seated. Rob right here, he's got a lot of options, but as we talked about, the legs are hard to be in play for at least retention techniques. Great for being able to make contact with our opponent, but because most of his weight is sitting into his hips, because his upper body is stacked over top of his hips, his legs can't move around in the same way. And so even for me, just like say stepping in between his legs, if he felt like he wouldn't be able to actually hip escape from here, if he just falls to his back right now, he's created much more distance from his upper body to mine. I can't reach his head now. I can't get anywhere close to underhooks and chest-to-chest connection. And he's going to be able to sit, fall back like this and be able to actually perform guard retention movements, or even fall back to a further range guard at that point. So, I mean, guard retention is a beast. There's a ton of information out there. There's a lot of great instructionals on it too, as like more light's being brought to it. But this is at least an introduction of just a few techniques, like a plan A, B, and C option, and some ways to tie together so that you guys aren't feeling so flustered, and hopefully you'll have some success retaining your guard.